1. Introduction. Introduction. Did you know that Africa has more tech hubs than Silicon Valley? Or that it's home to the world's youngest population with 60% under 25? These aren't just numbers. They're the building blocks of an entrepreneurial explosion that's about to change the global economy. In the next 15 minutes, you'll discover why Africa is the hottest market you've never considered and why investors, innovators, and visionaries are turning their attention to this untapped goldmine. For decades, the global business narrative has been dominated by Western markets, with Asia emerging as a powerful player. But the next economic powerhouse isn't where you'd expect it to be. It's in Africa, a continent bursting with youthful energy, technological innovation, and untapped opportunities. This is the story of a continent on the rise, rewriting the rules of business and shaping the future of global entrepreneurship. Two, the misconception, Africa's perceived poverty. When most people think of Africa, images of poverty and struggle come to mind. For years, the media has painted a picture of a continent in need, a place of constant crisis and hardship. This narrative has been so pervasive that it's shaped global perceptions, influencing everything from foreign policy to investment decisions. But what if everything we thought we knew about Africa was wrong? Media-driven stereotypes, the miseducation of Africa. For decades, mainstream media has played a significant role in shaping global perceptions of Africa, often focusing on poverty, political instability, and humanitarian crises, while neglecting the continent's successes, resilience, and economic growth. This one-sided portrayal has created a deep-rooted narrative that Africa is a place of despair rather than a land of opportunity. The dominant narrative, crisis over progress. When people outside Africa hear about the continent, it's often through reports of famine, war, disease outbreaks, or corruption scandals. Headlines sensationalize suffering, painting Africa as a region in perpetual turmoil. While these issues do exist, they do not define the continent. Countries like Rwanda, Ghana, and Kenya have booming tech industries, yet their successes rarely make front-page news in the West. Instead, coverage tends to focus on disasters, reinforcing outdated stereotypes. The charity-first mindset, aid versus investment. For years, global media and Western institutions have framed Africa primarily as a recipient of foreign aid rather than an investment destination. Campaigns featuring images of starving children and calls for charity have dominated the narrative, making it difficult for outsiders to see Africa as a place for business and innovation. This has discouraged potential investors who, instead of seeing thriving markets, see dependency. However, forward-thinking entrepreneurs and business leaders, including Jack Ma, have seen a different reality, one where Africa is a place to do business, not just give aid. The best way to help Africa is not by donating money, but by investing in its entrepreneurs, Ma has said. His perspective underscores the need for a shift from a charity-driven view of Africa to a partnership-driven approach. The single story problem, a continent misunderstood. One of the biggest issues with media portrayal is the single story phenomenon, where Africa is treated as one homogeneous place rather than a diverse continent with 54 distinct countries, thousands of languages, and varied economic landscapes. A drought in one region does not define the entire continent, just as one country's political unrest does not represent all of Africa. This limited perspective means that stories of African innovation, business growth, and cultural advancements often go untold. African entrepreneurs who are solving global problems through technology and sustainability rarely receive the same media attention as their Western counterparts. The rise of African media changing the narrative. With the advent of digital media and social platforms, African creators, journalists, and entrepreneurs are reclaiming the narrative. Homegrown media houses like Africa No Filter, CNN Africa, and BBC Africa Eye are telling authentic African stories that showcase the continent's growth and potential. Meanwhile, influencers and business leaders are using platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter to highlight success stories, challenge misinformation, and reshape global perceptions. Africa's true story is being told, not by outsiders, but by Africans themselves. The world is slowly starting to recognize that Africa is not just a place of problems, but a hub of innovation, resilience, and economic opportunity. Jack Ma's First Impressions of Africa, A Journey of Discovery. Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba and one of the world's most successful entrepreneurs, had spent decades building one of the most influential tech companies in the world. His experience in China, once considered a developing economy, had taught him that innovation often flourishes in places where resources are limited but ambition is abundant. However, when it came to Africa, even Ma carried preconceptions shaped by mainstream narratives. Before stepping onto African soil for the first time, he had several pressing questions. Would it be safe? Would he find real opportunities for business? Was Africa truly a place where entrepreneurship could thrive, or would he encounter overwhelming challenges that stifled progress? Like many global business leaders, Ma had been exposed to a media-driven portrayal of Africa, one that emphasized poverty, instability, and a lack of infrastructure. Yet, as his plane touched down and he began meeting young African entrepreneurs, his doubts quickly faded. A continent bursting with energy. From the moment he arrived, Ma was struck by the sheer energy of the people he met. Unlike the tired, struggling populations often depicted in international media, he found a vibrant, ambitious generation eager to create solutions, build businesses, and transform their economies. He visited universities, startup hubs, and innovation centers where young Africans were coding, designing, and engineering solutions that addressed local challenges. He saw firsthand how limited resources had inspired frugal innovation, where entrepreneurs leveraged technology to leapfrog traditional barriers. In countries like Kenya, Rwanda, and Nigeria, he encountered tech startups that were revolutionizing industries, from mobile banking systems like M-Pesa, which had already transformed financial transactions for millions, to agri-tech innovations that were modernizing farming practices. Ma later reflected, "I met so many young people full of ideas, full of dreams, and full of energy. The passion they have is even greater than what I saw in China 20 years ago. If I had known about Africa's potential earlier, I would have come 10 years ago." Innovation in the face of adversity. One of the most striking aspects of his visit was witnessing how African entrepreneurs were turning adversity into opportunity. He met startup founders who were using artificial intelligence to solve logistical challenges, building e-commerce platforms tailored to the African market, and even pioneering new models for renewable energy distribution. Unlike many Western business leaders who viewed Africa primarily through the lens of foreign aid and donations, Ma saw something different: a continent of problem solvers, not just problem bearers. A market of over 1.4 billion people with rising internet penetration and increasing consumer spending. A talent pool of highly skilled, ambitious youth ready to drive change. This realization was transformative for him. He saw a continent that reminded him of China in its early days of economic transformation, young, hungry for success, and on the brink of a digital revolution. Why didn't I come sooner? By the end of his visit, Ma wasn't just impressed, he was convinced that Africa was the future. He saw a massive, untapped opportunity, not just for himself, but for global investors, innovators, and business leaders willing to look beyond the stereotypes. Instead of asking whether Africa was ready for investment, he began to ask, why aren't more global businesses paying attention? Why is the world so slow to recognize Africa's potential? What can be done to accelerate entrepreneurship on the continent? Determined to play a role in Africa's rise, Ma took action. He launched the Africa Netpreneur Prize, a $10 million initiative to support African entrepreneurs. His goal was to provide funding, mentorship, and resources to help African startups scale, just as Alibaba had done in China. He encouraged African entrepreneurs to think big and act boldly, reminding them that the challenges they face today were similar to what China had experienced decades ago, and that the key to success was persistence, innovation, and belief in their own potential. A new narrative for Africa. Ma's first visit to Africa didn't just change his perception, it became a turning point in how he spoke about the continent to the world. He became a vocal advocate for African entrepreneurship, urging investors to look beyond outdated narratives and recognize Africa's position as a rising global economic powerhouse. His message was clear: Africa isn't just a continent of need, it's a continent of opportunity. Why Africa's potential is still overlooked. If Africa is so rich in opportunity, why hasn't the world fully caught on yet? The answer lies in the power of perception. 1. The media's influence for too long, international media has focused overwhelmingly on Africa's struggles, reinforcing an outdated, one-dimensional image of the continent. This constant portrayal of Africa as a land of humanitarian crises rather than economic potential has created deep-rooted biases. When people think of China or India, they think of rapid economic growth and innovation. When people think of Africa, they often think of poverty, corruption, and instability. This perception has had real consequences. Many investors are reluctant to put their money into African markets, fearing instability or risk. International businesses often assume there's no purchasing power or no infrastructure to support their operations. However, this perception is not based on reality. In reality, Africa is home to 7 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies. The African middle class is expanding rapidly, with a consumer market projected to reach $2.5 trillion by 2030. Countries like Rwanda, Ghana, Kenya, and Nigeria are leading the way in fintech, agritech, and e-commerce innovation. The real Africa is dynamic, entrepreneurial, and rapidly modernizing, but the world still sees it through a distorted lens. 2. The legacy of aid and charity. For decades, Africa has been positioned as a recipient of charity and foreign aid, rather than an equal partner in business and investment. This aid-driven approach has had both positive and negative effects. On one hand, humanitarian aid has helped in crisis situations. On the other, it has reinforced the idea that Africa is dependent on foreign help, rather than being a continent full of self-sufficient innovators and business leaders. This mindset has discouraged private sector investment. Instead of seeing Africa as a market to be tapped into, global businesses often treat it as a place to donate to or help. While philanthropy is important, Africa's true economic growth will not come from donations. It will come from investments, entrepreneurship, and trade. 3. Fear of the unknown. Many global investors simply don't know enough about Africa. Unlike markets in the US, Europe, or Asia, Africa remains unfamiliar to many business leaders. Lack of knowledge breeds hesitation and fear. Will my investment be safe? Is there enough infrastructure? Can businesses thrive in Africa? The answer to all these questions is yes, but changing minds takes education, exposure, and direct engagement, changing the narrative. Despite these challenges, the perception of Africa is beginning to shift. The continent is becoming impossible to ignore thanks to 1. The rise of African entrepreneurs and innovators. African startups are proving that innovation doesn't only come from Silicon Valley, China, or Europe. Fintech companies like Flutterwave and Paystack have put Africa on the global tech map. Agritech innovations are transforming how food is produced and distributed. E-commerce giants like Jumia are shaping Africa's digital economy. These success stories are forcing the world to take notice. 2. Global business leaders are taking an interest. Jack Ma's visit was just the beginning. Other global business leaders have begun exploring Africa's potential. Mark Zuckerberg visited Nigeria and Kenya, praising the continent's tech talent. Elon Musk, who was born in South Africa, has hinted at expanding Tesla's presence in Africa. Google, Microsoft, and Amazon are investing in African data centers and digital infrastructure. When influential figures advocate for Africa, it changes global perceptions and attracts more investors. The reality, Africa's entrepreneurial goldmine. Africa's entrepreneurial landscape is not just growing, it's exploding. The continent is experiencing a surge of innovation with more tech hubs than Silicon Valley, an expanding digital economy, and a wave of bold entrepreneurs tackling some of the world's biggest challenges. What makes Africa's entrepreneurial boom even more remarkable is that it is happening despite limited infrastructure, funding gaps, and regulatory hurdles. Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, has called African entrepreneurs the super first class in the world. That's not just a passing compliment, it's a reflection of the immense potential and resilience he witnessed during his visits to the continent. When you listen to the entrepreneurs, the dream they believe, the action and the passion, this is amazing, Ma remarked. The energy and ambition driving Africa's startup ecosystem rival any other region in the world, and it is changing the face of African business. From local solutions to global impact, one of the most compelling aspects of Africa's entrepreneurial movement is that it is not just about launching businesses, it's about solving real problems. African startups are innovating out of necessity, and in doing so, they are developing unique solutions that could impact global markets. Take, for example, the story of Inoluwa Aboyeji, the Nigerian entrepreneur who co-founded Andela, a company that trains and connects African software developers with global tech companies. Aboyeji started with a simple yet powerful idea: tap into Africa's vast pool of young, tech-savvy talent to meet the world's growing demand for skilled programmers. Today, Andela is valued at over $700 million, with thousands of developers placed at top companies like Facebook and Google. Another game changer is M-Pesa, the mobile money platform that revolutionized digital payments in Kenya. Originally designed to help unbanked populations access financial services, M-Pesa has since grown into a global case study on fintech success in emerging markets. It has been replicated in countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, proving that African innovation has global relevance. Africa's entrepreneurs, the next Alibaba. Jack Ma's own journey with Alibaba shares striking parallels with the African entrepreneurial experience. When he first pitched the idea of an e-commerce platform in China, nobody believed in it. Internet penetration was low, online payments were virtually non-existent, and the traditional business community was skeptical. But Ma saw something others didn't: a rising middle class, increasing internet adoption, and a hunger for innovation. Today, he sees the same story unfolding in Africa. Ma predicts that within the next decade, Africa will produce multiple billion-dollar startups akin to Alibaba. The conditions are ripe for success: a rapidly growing population, 1.4 billion people by 2030. A digital revolution, with mobile penetration exceeding 80% in many countries. A young, ambitious workforce eager to innovate and disrupt industries. However, Ma also cautions against short-term thinking. He advises aspiring entrepreneurs to adopt a long-term vision, saying, "If you want to start a business, don't think you will be successful next month or next year. Think about at least the next 5 years." This is a crucial mindset shift. Africa's most successful entrepreneurs understand that building sustainable businesses takes time. Whether they are launching e-commerce platforms, agri-tech solutions, or digital finance innovations, they are laying the foundation for a long-term transformation, turning limitations into opportunities. One of Africa's greatest strengths is its ability to turn challenges into opportunities. Where others see obstacles, African entrepreneurs see innovation waiting to happen. Lack of traditional banking infrastructure. Fintech startups like Flutterwave and Paystack are building seamless digital payment solutions. Unreliable electricity in rural areas. Companies like M-Kopa are pioneering pay-as-you-go solar energy systems. Limited healthcare access. Startups like 54Gene are leveraging genomics and AI to revolutionize African healthcare. This ability to leapfrog traditional development stages is setting Africa apart. Instead of waiting for conventional infrastructure to catch up, entrepreneurs are building custom solutions that work for Africa's unique context, and in doing so, they are creating new business models that can be exported worldwide.